I'm Yulia Makluk, and you have joined the webinar on zero waste pottery. Today, we have a very interesting topic, which is how to produce our ceramics without producing too much waste, or ideally producing zero waste, if it is possible at all. We will spend about a little bit more than an hour together talking about how do we refuse, reuse, and recycle clay, glaze, and ceramics. And we will have amazing, distinguished guests with us today, who I will introduce in a minute. But before that, I just wanted to say a few words about myself so that you know who your host is and can relate better. So as I said, I'm Yulia. I'm an environmentalist and self-taught potter from Ukraine, and I currently live in Ukraine as well. Some of you may have known me before from my social media of Here and Now Pottery, or from my guide on greener, it's called the Greener Pottery, a step-by-step guide to sustainable ceramic studio practice. Or maybe you have joined previous webinars in this series, Saving the World as a Potter. It is a series about how ceramic artists and potters can be more eco-friendly in what we are doing. And it is an open source free project supported by people on Patreon and also by the Risk Takers Fellowship, for which I am very grateful, and which allows us to keep these webinars free for anyone to join. So I'll just check if there are more people who want to join. Seems that we are okay with that. And now, without further ado, I want to present our guests, our speakers for today. So they are Lottie Douwes from the Netherlands and founder of the studio Lottie Douwes, who works with circularity in ceramics production, meaning closing the loop between production and waste of materials, so that we can use and reuse the same materials over and over again. And Lottie will talk more in details about how she works with this perspective in mind. And she has amazing ideas and products already to share with us and to talk about. And our second speaker today will be Shashank Nimkar from India, founder and CEO of the Earth Tatva Recycled Ceramics. Shashank is a multi-award winner and designer behind a production company which uses ceramic waste from the industry to create new ceramic bodies and to make a functional tableware out of that. And their aim is to deal with the massive amounts of ceramic industry waste, like this broken tableware and everything else. And he will also introduce us into greater detail. And before diving into this presentation, into very particular and thought-provoking material, we have all read through the questions that some of you wrote in your registration forms. And there were lots of more generic questions of how do you deal with studio waste in general. And I just thought that maybe I can make a very brief introduction about the basics, just going through, how do you set up your waste management, if you're just one person or several person studio and you are only starting dealing with this matter. So I will now, it will be like a short intro, and I will now start sharing my screen. So okay, let's start it. So what are the general basic types of studio waste in a ceramic production? And I'm talking about like more, not a factory, but you know, a potter or a few working together. So there would be 4 main types. Unfired clay, which is water from throwing and cleaning, some trimmings, greenware that didn't make it to firing, and things like that. Second type would be glazes and pigments or oxides. Again, water in which we clean brushes or tools, any drips of glazes that fell onto the surfaces, any glaze sludge, or something that remains at the end, at the bottom of the bucket, and also any buckets or jars of unknown origin with, you know, some colored substances in them that sometimes happen in a studio. Next type would be the fired ceramics after the kiln. So any items that failed in the firing, like they cracked or we just don't like how they turned out. Any broken pieces, and also sometimes pieces that are functionally okay, but they didn't get sold over the years and we just don't know what to do with them because they, you know, they keep piling on our shelves. And the last type would be the packaging. I don't know about you, but like for me, it's one of the problems because I get so many boxes and different buckets and films that also collects in the studio, and you have to do something over them. So these are, and of course there also is like a general household waste, like, you know, food leftovers or anything like that, but it's not specific to the ceramic production, so I will not talk about that much. So speaking about zero waste or circularity or waste management, you know, current guiding principles or something that people mostly agree upon or the experts recommend is so-called the 5R principles. Previously, we used to have 3R, reduce, reuse, recycle, but now like it had been expanded. So there are principles like refuse. So like before buying something or bringing something into your studio, like think about whether you actually need it, how you will deal with that, and maybe choose not to use some particular materials that are not manageable or that are environmentally harmful. Reduce is just using less of those materials and just buying less stuff and less materials in general. Reuse is use as long as possible, like for example, bucket. Repurpose, sorry, is when we have one material or one product that can be used in a different, for a different function. And recycling is like the least preferable option is when the material cannot be reused, but needs to be, you know, remade into something else. Like, for example, if we take fired ceramics, we cannot reuse it, but we can crush it and make a new ceramic body out of that, add it as a grog. And of course, you know, there is an option of getting rid of something and directing it to the landfill, so like wasting it, but that would not be in the zero waste or circular fashion. So it's not presented here, although we all know it sometimes happens. So I thought I will quickly go through these types and just say a few words about what can be done with that. And again, it's super basic, and our expert will talk in a greater detail about that. So unfired clay is probably the easiest kind of ceramic waste because, you know, it's easy to collect, reclaim, and reuse it. Good if you have a pug mill, like a machine that helps you to recycle that clay. If not, it's completely doable with hands. needs some labor, but still doable. And I also wanted to say that Joe Thompson from the Old Forge Creations, who is a well-known ceramicist and educator, also helped me to prepare for this webinar, and he shared some of his resources, for which we are very grateful. So here you see like a scheme or plan of how the glaze, the claim-reclaim process can go. So like you collect water with clay, for example, from throwing or cleaning, you let it settle, then you pour like the clean water, the upper water away, and the more clay collects on the bottom. And then when you have enough, you just stir it, pour it on a slab, and then like mix it, and it's good to go for a new clay making. Like one of the options how it can look. This is like a plaster slab to collect the reclaim. Now moving further to glazes and oxides. So basically you don't want to throw it away ever, because it's full of potentially harmful materials like frits or heavy metal oxides. So you don't like let it go through the drain. You have to recycle it continuously, and there are two main ways. So one is create new glaze out of it, and another is create granulate to add to your other glazes or clay bodies. Again, very simple scheme of the 3-bucket system. I wonder if you've heard about it, but it's like quite popular. So you set up 3 buckets. In the first, you pour your glaze cleaning water, let it settle, and then you keep admitting you guessed the webinar, and then you like collect this clean water on the upper side, put it into the next bucket, again let it settle, and do it one more time. At the very end, you have like almost clean water, which you can use for throwing or for washing or whatever. And this sediment you can use as a mystery glaze. So it's like a completely good glaze. The only thing is that like color can be unpredictable. So you may add more pigments or oxides and use it for decorative purposes or inside, for example, a vase. So that's about these 3-bucket systems. That's from Joe Thompson again, pretty much the same, so I won't stop here. And this slide is about granulate. So granulate is like when you take this sediment of glaze and you do not use it as a glaze, but you make chips out of it, and you fire it in a kiln on a low temperature. And what you get is like this small sizes of glaze that have been pre-fired, so it's not water soluble anymore, but it also hasn't melted. It's like these little pieces or chunks, and then you can add it either to your clay body or you can add it to your glaze to create either dots or any flowings or anything like that, and make your glaze more interesting. I've experimented with it a little, just started. And here you can see on the left is like a bowl with these chips of glaze, this granulate that I added to my regular glaze. And on the right side, you can see that it's created these brown spots, which I think I would experiment more with and see if I can get any more interesting results. And last one thing is fired ceramics. Like sometimes you open a kiln and you don't like what you see in it. So like if it's unfunctional, if it's broken or cracked, the only thing would be to crush them and then to either make grog or shamot or make mosaics or any art objects. In some countries, I know that the ceramic waste can be brought to to the construction waste site, and they will crush it and use for construction or for the roads. If it is so in your country, then probably you are a lucky one. But if there is no such option in your country, then you can do it yourself on a smaller scale. Just an example of also my recent experiments. So this is crushed ceramics and smalt. Smalt is like stained glass that they use for mosaics. So I get it from a friend who works from mosaics, and she has lots of these shards. So I just crush it, add it to my ceramic bodies, and then make some decorative pieces out of that. Packaging, number one is like try to choose biodegradable materials if possible. So like not oil-based plastic, and reuse wherever you can. I mean, we're all good at reusing boxes, packaging paper, peanuts, or anything like that. These are just options that are more eco-friendly or less. So the number one choice would be reusing any old packaging materials or any paper, like newspapers, office paper that has been shredded, brown craft paper, honeycomb paper, and things like that. Bio-based products are like somewhere in the middle, and there is some controversy about them. And the oil-based plastic, like bubble wrap or styrofoam, are like are considered the least sustainable at the moment. Just an example of how I'm using clothes. So this is like a reclaimed vintage clothes that I make furoshiki out of it and wrap my cups before shipping them. And that's the end of my intro. And if you'd like to read more basic materials like that, you could go to either to Joe Thompson's Instagram, Old Forts Creations, where he shares some of the tips. You can also follow me at Here and Now Pottery, and you could get a copy of my guide of sustainable studio practice. And now I think we could move on and to hear a presentation from Lottie about circularity and what she does with the ceramic waste. And after Lottie's presentation, we will have a chance to ask questions in the chat. So there will be like a little discussion. And after that, we will have Shashank with his presentation. So Lottie, the floor is yours.
So I'm Lottie Douwes. I'm based in the Netherlands, and I'm gonna share something about my story. So I really love food. I love the differences in texture, color, and if I can, I spend a lot of time on it. And of course, I like to present it in a way that it enriches the food. So I use my own tableware, but also from others for it. I love to go out surfing, and especially to travel to all sorts of countries and to go surf. And I like to combine travels with learning new crafts or work in other studios, which you can see here. And I will go through it quickly. I don't have my notes visible, so I will do it without. But so I started my studio when I was still studying at Design Academy Eindhoven here in the Netherlands. And I started my studio with these stirring sticks called stockies. And I was working on some porcelain. I'm really like a self-taught ceramist, and I didn't know much about it when I started. So I started with these stockies, and I slip casted them way too thin. And I found a shop who sold them, and when the clients bought them, they already broke when they walked out the store. So I got a lot of feedback, and then this collaboration with the shop, because they were so enthusiastic about my work, It helped a lot with getting feedback from clients and actually become better in what I was doing at that time. So we're talking about like 12 years ago. So a lot of the works I made are spatial designs. So here you can see one of my flower vases, which is hanging onto the ceiling, and you can adjust the height so you can create a different perception of the spaciousness around you. All made from porcelain, and this is one of the projects I graduated with and I still sell a lot, which is called the lamp and socket. So the bigger shape provides the light and the smaller one provides electricity above the space where you actually need it, instead of plugging in walls and have all these cables running through the space. So the start of my ceramic, basically a circular ceramic production, started while I was traveling here in the Philippines, and I saw all these fragile islands, and they just had a couple of cyclones coming over and needed to rebuild everything. And it just made me think about how I was practicing my own studio and creating basically like a whole bunch of products, questioning like who actually needs it, and also how I could do better, like reducing my footprint, which led towards a residence I got the chance to do in China, in Jindajian, which is very famous for its super white porcelain. But I heard that the white porcelain became more gray and became more scarce. So I wanted to do a research here and see if I could make the super white porcelain again out of shards, broken pieces. So I went to the city, and this is just an image of one of the streets. So if you imagine the factories over there, which are producing, at least here for a lot of companies in Europe, large productions, almost 50% of what they produce is waste, and a lot of them is produced at the end. Because it's like a C or B quality we don't want to sell here in the shops. So you have warehouses full with waste, but if you zoom in here, you can see this is just in the streets, but the factories have all these piles in their gardens too. So I was able to pick up shards here. They also sell shards on the market. And if we look at porcelain, we still find shards as if they were made like a week ago or yesterday, although they are thousands of years old. So porcelain doesn't really decay. I think it takes up to between like 2,000, 4,000 years before it becomes dust again. And that it's a beautiful material, of course, but this is also a downside of it. So here is, I started working with all sorts of materials. So I went to these warehouses where they sell bisque shapes. You can glaze them yourself, but there was also a lot of bisque waste over there. Because it easily chips, and so at the bottom shelves a lot of broken pieces were there, and I was able to take them with me. And this is one of the examples of the super white shards I found at the back of a factory where they produced eggshell porcelain, and this is just fine ground shards, and as you can see, it's quite solid blocks, and it has a very nice shimmering texture at the top of it. So this is me doing a lot of samples. So I work quite intuitively, and I like to talk a lot with people who have more knowledge about special materials, and try to use that in my samples. And this is one of the results I made from the white porcelain shards. Let me accept someone who's waiting. So I hope that you can see it, but on the right image, you can see that it has a very nice shimmering texture. And it also was very translucent, as you can see at the left image, and you couldn't see the difference between the original white, super white new porcelain and this one. And this one is made with 50% shards in regular, more gray, mixed with a regular gray porcelain. Oh, let me see. Ah, okay. Hope this is, yeah. So, a couple of years ago, I went to Peru also for a residence where I learned a bit more about working with raw materials. So here in the Netherlands, I was used to just buy at a supplier, just bags of porcelain. It was already pre-mixed. And here in Peru, they because it's harder to get these materials, they have all the mines, which basically have all the available materials to create porcelain or ceramics from. And they also had a very rich history in producing ceramics. So here I started working with raw materials. So I went to specific areas in the country. And what I wanted to do is this research I did here was focused on showing the colors of the country, and especially areas which are threatened by climate change, and also has a long history of ceramic making, which already had disappeared over the thousands of years. And I took some just small parts of material from the countryside and translated that into ceramics. So you get an overview of the landscape in colors. And so this is so I went to the coastal area, which is more of a desert, and to the mountains. And I took all the materials and did a lot of tests with preheating them so they are easier to crush, and mix them with all types of glaze and clay. So here you can see me crushing it all. I needed to do it by hand, so it was a lot of labor. And unfortunately, I can't show the movie, but this is a sample where you can see the shimmering texture of a very nice area called Matucana, which is mixed here with the porcelain. And unfortunately, you can't see it, but I have the sample here next to me too. And I don't know if you can see it on the camera. It's very hard to see, but you can see the shimmering top part, and this is 100% waste. So it was the waste from their studio where I did the research, and they said, yeah, we have actually a lot of unglazed material, and this is so this is unglazed white porcelain, and just 100% waste. Like. Let me see if I can go back to this. Yeah, so it was the start of all this knowledge started. I took it all back to my studio and started to work on a circular collection. And so this is a collection where I use a lot of funnels, cut off materials, and which is then added to white clay and it creates a speckle effect in the clay. All the drips that are formed on the table, I create this marble effects. So it looks, maybe it has some sort of a texture, but it's actually very smooth. And it's just created by the different materials in there. So one of the things I do, I also co-work with other ceramic studios. They also produce part of my products. And I'm also able to use their waste. So these are the plates. You can see a difference in color, and these are made from leftovers. They can't reuse it, and it's too less. It's colored porcelain. It's too less to do a new production from. So what we do is we create the flat plates for the circular collection tableware. from it, which are all in a ton-sur-ton effect in differences in color. And the cut-offs are collected and added to white clay. So the deep plates are, they have the waste from the flat plates in it. So you create a connection between the two of them. And the tableware collection is made for restaurant use, very intense use. What I also like to do is, so what I do with my studio waste, I have all the, so we heard it before, like the raw clay, for example, and I work a lot. There are a couple of people who didn't mute. So can you please unmute?
Lottie, as a host, you can go to the participants and selectively mute people.
I have to, but I don't know who is.
You will see that their microphone is not crossed.
There, and yeah, I think, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sorry for the interruption, everyone. Whoops. Yeah, so what I do is, okay, let me see if I can take this away. I can't see my own presentation anymore. Well, anyway, I can do it without the images. So what I do is I collect all the colored clay, and it sometimes becomes more dark or gray, and it's often a little bit of off color, which is not super nice. And what I do is just to enrich it with a glaze, and I like to use transparent glazes, and then color them with just a small amount of pigments. And by adding more layers of glaze, you create more color as well. So you can create very nice gradients as well. Which is also, so I just show you some examples of applying. So what I like to do when I use colored glaze, and I use spray technique a lot, and there's always something in your spray gun left over. So I like to spray it in a certain way. So I change all the settings in the spray gun, and on the compressor, I think it's called in English as well. And then you can create like differences in in spray patterns, and then enrich. So I always have some white bisque plates at the side, so I can just use to empty the spray gun. And let me see. Ooh. So yeah, I can't see the text anymore because there's just let me see if I can. Yes, okay, finally it's away. Sorry. So I work a lot with my own waste and waste from other studios, also with other suppliers such as restaurants and factories. From all this waste, I develop new clay bodies, glazes, underglaze, new pigments, and develop some structures. I use various techniques and different production techniques. So here on the left, you can see one of the things I made for a client. And there was quite a lot of waste involved in this because a lot of them had, they didn't came out nicely in the kiln. So I crushed them, and on the right you can see some of the samples I made with the waste, which also contained a glaze, as well as anchovies and like a grog. But as you can see here, so with the newest collection of lamp and socket, I also wanted to involve the production process, and to keep the shapes round. Often you need a support mold in the kiln, which you can see here on the left image at the bottom part, because the inner socket needs to fit perfectly in the open parts. So what we did is we redesigned the support mold so it can become a product. And I make the lamps in all sorts of colors. So we slip cast the support mold in the same color. And then I designed a cloche, kind of a bell jar, which you can use to cover, because I had a request from a client restaurant, and they said we want to have like a nice product so we can give like a nice chocolate or something, or present a bill with some things at the end of the dinner at the table. So the cover part is made from a reclaimed clay, and the bottom part is just a leftover, which is normally been tossed away and been waste. So I think if we introduce a design process in these things, we can also reduce waste a lot. So currently I'm doing a research which is called perpetual porcelain, which is based on recipe development for industrial productions, large productions. This started with where I collected waste from restaurants, all sorts of shards, which gave me a beautiful palette of all types of porcelain, stoneware, earthenware. And so here you can see an example of a porcelain which contains 80% shards, which is, and then 20% of regular porcelain, and it's just enough to get it out of a mold, and so you can still slip cast it. And here are some examples of glazes made from all sorts of waste, stoneware and porcelain. So this is an example of a stoneware plate which was chipped. So here are the big pieces. You grind it. I use a lot of different grain sizes. And here you can see I just test with all sorts of applications. So I spray, I brush, I dip, I roll, bisque, use different fire temperatures. And then, yeah, so here you can see some of examples of the grain sizes and different materials. I also mill a lot, so you can create a very fine powder. I use it with water, and I also, so what Julia also explained with when the water settles, you can take off the water parts, and I can reuse it again. I make glaze from it. It doesn't behave always the way you want, but it can create very nice effects too. And I do a lot of tests with, so this is from a stoneware, but you can see it disappears under a glaze, but it's still very visible when it's unglazed. So I try to do all these tests. I also get some clients, they have broken parts of their sockets, they return them to me, to the studio. So I can grind them, and at the right part, you can see it's just made from shards from the socket you see on the left. And although a part you can see is glazed, also the unglazed part is very nice and glossy. So every type of waste has its own beauty in it, and I try to capture it and find the best way for application, production technique, and how it in the end enriches a product. So here I was asked to design an award, and we crushed the previous award from the previous years. And we wanted to have it still visible, so I used quite a big grain size and added 33%, which was still possible then with a big grain size to slip cast, and then it was glazed with a translucent glaze. So now I took all this knowledge into a collection. So I recently founded a circular ceramic studio, where I have one collection of shapes, and I will make them with all the waste every time in a new production. So you cannot order the same all over again, which I think is also nice. So it will be a family of shapes, a family of forms, and in that case they all fit together, but they will all have a different outlook depending on the waste I received. So here you can just see differences on temperatures. With waste, it's the same waste, but at the left it's mixed with a glaze, and on the right it's it's a grog in basically a grog in clay, and you can see the differences in temperature. And I like to do a lot of experiments with techniques like application techniques. And on the right you can see two different waste glazes mixed with each other, creating these beautiful dots. And on the left, it's just a spraying technique. And here's also, so I also work with pigments. You can't sell, they are out of sale, and I reuse them in these typical like small amounts, and to create special effects with it. And the newest form is this little light, and I'm able to produce it with the waste shards from porcelain, and then just slightly mixed with a little bit of regular clay to create this like lighting objects. So this is about it. I saw that there was a lot of questions also in the so maybe we can go through it, Julia, and
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for this inspiring presentation, Lottie. I think it's been amazing, like all the work that you've done, all the research and the products that you are making, like truly, truly powerful. Could you maybe make me host again so that I can manage it, or we can go on like this and then I will do it later?
let me just stop the share.
Yeah, stop the share. Yeah, I will do it. I will reclaim host from you.
Perfect.
Okay, so now moving to the questions. So we have a question from Ho Lei, I think, and this is the same question that actually I was going to ask. So thank you for raising it.
Great.
Like, this is fascinating. Which machine do you use to grind the shards? Thanks.
Yeah, so I have several machines. So when I get, for example, now I got from a company several types of waste. Also, maybe also interesting to share also their laboratory glass to create glaze from. And just tableware from their canteen. So when I start with small amounts, I always use pestle and what is it called? Well, just to, you know, you use it for spices,
like
pestle and mortar. Thanks.
Yeah.
Pestle mortar. So and it's very, and I have all sorts of sieves. So from 60 until, what is it, like 320 or something, a mesh size. So these I use a lot, and I just go from big to smaller and smaller and smaller. So this is for the small amounts. I made some kind of like a centrifuge machine where you can toss in parts and then it just spins around very quickly, and it has a sieve underneath. And so I collect all, I have two types of sieves, so I can collect different grain sizes. But when using porcelain, it basically a lot of metal from the inner part comes off. So we need to take it out with a magnet again. So it's not very useful for porcelain. And for porcelain, I use a stone crusher. Yeah. So and I use a ball mill. So these are the machines basically I use. Yeah.
I just wanted to add a clarifying question to that as well. Like, what are the volumes that you are able to crush like in one go? Well, and like, what are the volumes that you are actually working with? Is it like 1 kilogram? Is it like 100 kilogram per time?
Well, that's so I'm no, I work a lot with the smaller amounts, but it depends a bit on the type of material. So if we talk about the hardest material to crush, which is the high fire porcelain, of course, and especially the thick parts, because there's also the thinner it is, it's easier to to crush. So you can also take all of these things into account when you design or make something, right? So if you make it a little thinner, it's far easier to crush in the end. So just make it thick when it needs to be thick, I think. But then for the porcelain part, I'm now looking into ways with actually a windmill. So here in the Netherlands, it's kind of classic, but you all know the windmills here. So there are a couple of them which are unused, and they need to use them either to keep them in good shape as well. So I'm now in close contact with one of these mills to see if we can grind a volume of 200 or between like 200 to 500 kilos, and it will be wind powered. So there's just we don't need any machines or whatsoever. So that would be great if we can use it. And otherwise we use companies who usually crush for the brick industry. And they are able to crush larger volumes. So there are also these machines which crush the bricks, and they're also in small sizes. You can use it on site, on a building site, for example, and then you can crush it. So depends a bit on the scale of your factory or studio, what fits you. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. The windmill idea just sounds like
would be
so
amazing,
sustainable.
no? Yeah. So they are already using stones to crush for pigments, and it just needs to run for like 2 weeks or so, because it will take a long time to become powder. Yeah. So if you imagine, so also when you crush the material, it needs to be crushed from 2 sides. This is because the pressure from 2 sides makes it far more easier to become a powder. So you can imagine if you have a very thick layer you put in your pestle or mortar, it will take forever. So just use small amounts, it goes way faster. Yeah.
I see. And we will probably hear more about crushing ceramics from Shashank soon, but we still have questions to you, Lottie. So Leah Valentin asks, and she says, or him, I'm sorry, they say, such great work. I find it really inspiring. I was wondering how you handle issues of food safety when it comes to recycling and tableware.
Yeah, well, it is, so from most of the waste, I know what's in there. Or you can determine also a lot by seeing, what kind of oxides are being used, creating certain colors. When I, for example, glaze the dinnerware, it's always been glazed with a glaze I know that it's food safe. So when I use a lot of things mixed in a clay body or either applied under a glaze. So for instance, the ones, if you use a spraying technique which creates a certain pattern, I usually cover it again with a food safe glaze. But it's possible to do tests. So you can test your materials in a lab if you want to be 100% certain. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Because if not, I have one. Okay, if you're thinking of any questions, please write them in the chat. And mine is about like the perception, like your audience and your clients. How do they see you and your products? Whether the fact that it's circular is an advantage to them, or is it something that they are like more suspicious? How does it influence the price for the client? Is it cheaper or more expensive? So yeah, about the marketing.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I just realized that I forgot to share that in the beginning. So for me, the whole circular process is something I think we should all just do, or at least try to get as close as possible. But I feel like a lot of these recycled products which are in the market are not particularly the one you find most beautiful. So we still keep the other products. So what I find important is to search for ways to reuse all the waste in such way that it becomes a really beautiful product. So people are usually attracted by the product just because they love it. And then after it, they hear the story about the circularity and they're like, oh, wow, oh, I didn't know about that. So which is another extra layer. So I find it really important to think through this process of what you actually design. So I see myself as a designer also in that way to to really create beautiful products in the first place. So where's a market for? But if we look at the restaurants, it takes a long way to get them because they're always a little bit afraid to use color, for example. So they are so used to have white plates. So what I often do is just to give them a couple of plates so they can test it in the kitchen and to see how it actually enriches. For example, these green tones, they fit very well with salads and with all sorts of colors. They really pop out on a color plate instead of just a white plate or the natural tones we are so used to use. So what their experience is often is that they really, once they use it, they really like it, and it also kind of tickles their creativity again in how to present their dishes. So in terms of a marketing, it's always I think if you have either way a family of forms, but then always in a different color, you anyway create a unity in it. Or I don't know, you create one type of recipe from, like if you always use you have like 3 types of favorite clays, and you can create your own recipe with your own waste, and then just I don't know, create always the same face or whatever, just a product line with this particular colors in use. It's very possible to sell it. And I'm now so I'm upscaling also the work I do, because in my own studio I can only do like a certain amount of volumes, also in terms of waste, but also in terms of production. So we're now upscaling it with factories, and we're gonna use all sorts of waste collected. So there's like 3.5 million kilos of ceramic waste in these secondhand stores, and it's mostly sinks or tableware or things like that. So we're gonna reuse it in tableware collections produced in large scale. So that's why I'm doing all the tests now, recipe tests, so they can upscale it.
Wow, it's really, really amazing. And it is actually like a good transition to our next guest, who works on a bigger scale with the industry waste. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think there are lots of food for thought for us all as well. Like, how do we try and reuse our shards as well and incorporate and create beautiful, hopefully beautiful designs with them. Thank you so much on the presentation, and we wish you all the success with your further journey, and hope to hear more from your endeavors on industry scale.
Yay, great. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And now I want please welcome our next guest, Shashank Nimkar from India, from the Earth Tatva company, who will tell us more and even in more depth about recycling the ceramic shards. Shashank, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Shashank from Earth Tatva. So since I'll just share my story of how I actually came about with the idea of using recycled ceramics. So I actually was pursuing animation for my undergraduation, for my bachelor's in design. And I have been always fond of using different materials for different kinds of projects. So even when I did animation, I specialized in stop motion animation, where we make these miniature sets with different materials, move them frame by frame, and click different pictures. When we play these pictures in a sequence, we get this animation. And so during that time, I worked with wax candles, real vegetables, clay, and paper and wood as these materials for my animation projects. And then as we move forward, I started exploring different materials like uh, epoxy and matchsticks, again paper cut, and some laser cutting as well. So during this time, I realized that there's a lot of waste that happens during the projects. And then, so again, when it comes to miniature, I made this miniature of my classroom uh, with all the waste materials that I could find around. So when you see this picture on the right hand side, the a tube light that we have, that's actually made out of a refill from a pen. And all the other materials are also from waste, which are just repainted again to look like a new model. And so when I was pursuing my master's in industrial design, again in ceramic in class, we once visited a ceramic manufacturing hub in a part of India. And there, me and my friends saw these production rejects that were thrown on the roadside. So just in every lane of the production town, we could see these heaps of rejects that were just lying there. And that is when me and my friends thought that, okay, this is a lot of waste. We should do something about this. At least we should be considering it while we make new creations out of it. And that was also my epiphany moment to realize that archaeology is actually based on this fact that ceramics don't biodegrade for centuries. When we excavate these ancient sites, we find the first thing we find is clay utensils and clay idols. And so I believe everyone who is working with recycled or circular ceramics, they will have a similar story, but the journey will be different and the same revelations perhaps. And so I started working on my self project while I was at college itself for my graduation project. And then I started to understand through my secondary research what is happening about waste around the world. Just to understand different case studies. So here are a few case studies that I came across. So in Norway, they actually have this, at least had this back then. I don't know if they are still continuing, that they put six milk cartons in the seventh one, write their name and their phone number and submit it to a collection center. And every week there's a national lottery that's announced on the television. So this actually inspired the citizens to collect it and give it back to the recycling centers. So the recycling percentage went up from 35% to 68% because of this. So I think this was very inspiring. And so while we saw examples of incentivizing collection of waste and reusing of waste, there are other examples of how we penalize if our citizens don't use waste properly or it's not organized properly. So in Zurich, they didn't use to throw away waste other than the official bags that they get from the government. So that's again a very interesting case study. So when we and I also used to watch a lot of TV series based on how we can reuse waste. So this is one of the series that used to come where there are different industries around the world who are using leftovers or probably afterlife of various products and extract materials from these and then make new products out of it. So as you see, the trumpet in this picture is actually made from the metals extracted from our electronics. So that's actually super interesting. And as an industry, so I was always focused on developing something which can be implemented at an industrial scale, because at least in India, what happens is there is a lot of need for different kinds of products, and we cannot really take away the part of industry in it. And with there's so much of production happening, we also have so much of waste. And because of that, there's a new policy in various parts of the world, which is called extended producer responsibility, where the brands who are manufacturing and selling their products, their responsibility doesn't end at the point where they sell their product to the consumers, but it continues where they have to be responsible of how they take back the end of life products and how do they process those materials and products further. And that's where the extended producer responsibility comes in. And I thought this may be applied to the ceramic industry as well, because ceramics in India, so we have these scrap acceptors, people who accept waste, and uh, uh, they basically accept waste from households, and then they segregate that waste based on different materials, and then give it forward to different recycling units for these respective materials. But nobody really accepts ceramic waste, even if we have extensive use of it. So that's why this was a very important point in the project. And then I looked at the different scenario of waste itself in the country, of what is really happening and what kind of waste we already have. So that was a real eye opener. Also, unfortunately, we do not have very safe working conditions at landfills. And apart from inert waste, we have these electronic waste as well as these bio waste as well. So inert waste, especially, which is the ceramic waste, is categorized under the construction and demolition waste. So that's why, because it's inert, it doesn't interact with the environment as much. It is neglected most often. So that was also a better case to work on this. And then, so this is one of the most iconic landfills in the town that I reside in, where I think since past 4 decades, the waste from households and commercial complexes is being collected and unfortunately just dumped in a particular designated area. And so just recently they have put these machines to segregate different kinds of materials and then send it forward to different processing units. And I'm sure they would have a lot of ceramic in this as well, which would neither burn away nor they would be able to separate it other than with rocks. So again, so what are the benefits of recycling? And one thing is that the whole society runs when we have a strong economy, and we have to keep the economy running. And that's how, through one of the reports, I got to know that if we are just landfilling any kind of waste, a 10,000 ton of waste, we can create only 6 jobs. But if we recycle any material in the amounts of probably 10,000 tons, we can generate 36 jobs. So that also offers a lot of support to various families, and also generates good revenues for the economy. And of course, we save a lot of resources. So that was a big motivation. Then, so I studied what happens to different kinds of materials in their afterlife. Ceramic, as you know, it doesn't biodegrade at all. It's just there as a dead weight. Wood, it eventually rots away. Plastics, so depending on what kind of plastic it is, it may take a couple of 100 years to degrade. Metals, they eventually rust away, and we can reuse them by melting them. And glass is one of the most ancient materials that is being recycled for multiple times. So that is something that is already set as a process in the industry, and all the consumers also know about it. So, and of course, there is some kind of similarity in terms of the silica family between glass and ceramics. And so what are the current uses of ceramics? Of course, this is purely based on the context of the Indian region. We either use this as a material to fill up all the potholes that we have on the roads and probably cover them up with different materials, or we of course use them as mosaics. Now the challenge was that if we have to apply this solution to an industry level, we cannot rely on making mosaics, because that would be a very limited application of it. So we had to find a way so that we could have a universal solution to this. Then for my primary research, I visited this industrial cluster which manufactures sanitary ware products. There are around 100 units, or sorry, 250 units now, who at different scale, operating at different scale, that manufacture different kinds of sanitary ware. So earlier they had around 7 to 8% of wastage from their production, and after some intervention from various other bodies, they were able to bring down their wastage to 2 to 3%. And then there, of course, as we got to know from Lotte earlier as well, the wastage are, of course, the glaze waste and the fired waste that we have. And industries do a lot of casting as well as various other processes. So they have to use plaster molds as well, which is also a huge concern for these industries, because plaster molds have very limited life and they cannot be reused in its own primary purpose like that. So, and industries right now, at least here, they just dump all the landfills. And since past decade, at least the pollution control board has got really strict. So now none of the industries can throw away any kind of waste outside their premise. Earlier, I have heard stories that if we visited some ceramic manufacturing town by road, we could see these rejections put on either side of the road 10 kilometers before reaching the town. So there is so much of waste that's already there, and with so much of production happening now, it's just almost like a sea of waste that we can see here. Fortunately, in this industrial cluster, I found that they're already using this waste for their production. But the percentage they're using is very small. It's 2 to 3% in their production composition. However, the scale is so big that even the 2 to 3% is consuming a huge amount of waste that we see there. And what I could find is these two variations of broken pieces, because I was just assuming how would we do it at a bigger scale. So that's why I retorted to using just the grades of the mesh size that was already available or being used by the industry. So one is in a chip form and the other is in a very fine powder form. So again, we should always reduce our consumption, reuse what we can, and upcycle. But the challenge here was that if we have to make an universal solution, we may not be able to reuse those pieces exactly the way we need, because it would become very subjective to implement at an industrial scale. And it is also very harmful to work with ceramic shards. We, of course, need a lot of safety equipments to work with that. And we'll have to train all the people who will be employed to work with that. So right now, what I thought was it would be best to recycle it further so that we are able to use that material directly and keep reusing it. Now, of course, the methods usually for recycling are either pulverizing, melting, or shredding. Melting and shredding usually applies to metals and plastics respectively, and pulverizing is what we could use for ceramics. So again, how do we really bind these things together? Because the broken ceramic shards do not have any kind of binding properties. They are just super inert. So just getting to know something that we use every day, we are shifting towards paper cups from the single-use plastic cups. Now, even paper cups have a lining of plastic inside them so that they can contain liquid. And that is something that constrains the afterlife of this product, because we can't separate the lining of plastic with the paper body that we have. And then a lot of this used paper cups are not being recycled because of this issue of two materials being fused together. So the idea was that we have to try to use a product with a single material, the waste with a single material, so that we are able to reuse this multiple times and try to make it as circular as possible. Because as designers, what happens is most often we end up either using cement or resin as a binder. So we are, of course, able to make better performing or better looking products with it, but at the end of life we are not able to separate the binder and the dry waste that we have, and it eventually ends up in landfill, or we just use it as a aggregate by crushing it. So that was the whole idea since the beginning, that we have to try to use or create a monomaterial through it. And this is how we started our journey, by trying to manufacture using jigger jolly. But then because we are using so much of recycled content, we got lots of cracks as soon as the body got in contact with plaster molds. And then we tried different compositions from 10% recycled content to 90% recycled content. And sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't, and trying different binders. And sometimes the test pieces got stuck to the mold itself. So of course we had a lot of fun, and then we tried different compositions where we could get different colors, but still the outer body was cracking and inside it was quite smooth. So a very adventurous journey. We tried making slabs as well through hand building and other processes, but again, the body was just too dry, so it wasn't happening. And then fortunately, slip casting worked for us. And so this was, of course, with 70% recycled material for now. Uh, and so initial test we made 100 ml and then 1 kg. So we started increasing the batch size of our materials, and we were able to cast good pieces with it. So then we tried firing at different temperatures. So the top image that we see is fully exposed body, which was fired at 1160, and the bottom one is the glazed one with 70% recycled content. And then it was tested in the market to see what kind of response people are giving, because at least in India, people are very conscious about things being reused. So I was afraid if, and of course the ceramic waste itself, because I was afraid people may not even identify this as a problem, that it's a stone. Why would it be a problem if ceramic is not recycled? Uh, and a lot of times we use utensils made out of metal. So it is also a concern that people might not be very friendly with the material, especially when it is recycled and it comes in contact with the food. But the response was quite good. A lot of people were quite curious about it already, and they were quite accepting. So that was motivating. And so one of the things that I came across during the test was that because we had to carry many tests in a single day during my project. Once it so happened that I think it was the fourth casting of the day, and the mold was already wet. So by mistake, I emptied the mold quite early than I was supposed to. So we got a very thin cast out of it, and it still held its shape quite well. So that was a revelation that the composition is strong enough to hold a very thin shape by itself, and we can have thin casts as we move ahead in future. This is overall the map of how linear and circular ceramics would be working. So we basically start with this part where the pieces are landfilled from the industrial manufacturing. We pulverize it, bring it back to manufacturing, make a slip out of it, and then start casting. So rest of the process remains the same. So that was also the idea, because a lot of times when we have these green materials in the market, what happens is the industries have to invest upfront a huge cost to either buy new machinery that can use the material, or adapt a new technology. And with that, the end product, which is a better product in terms of the environment impact, becomes very, very expensive. And so that to some extent defeats the purpose. But with this, we are able to keep the process same, so the existing manufacturers can directly start using the composition and reduce the dependency on their raw materials and start using their waste materials. These are the very initial prototypes that we developed during the project. And again, the idea is that because there is a lot of myth in the market about recycled products in general, that we cannot use a particular amount, more than a particular amount of recycled content to make good quality products, or we cannot have any kinds of colors with it. And of course, the recycled material cannot be food safe. So to cater to all these concerns, it was very important to create tableware out of it first, because you could have made any form out of it. And again, while starting this project itself, I had just thought that as a designer, how am I going to add value to the ecosystem, to the industry? Because if I make another collection out of the products, it will be my own version of an existing product, and which we might have to keep changing collection after collection. It will have its own end of life in terms of the trends that are going on. But what if we are able to make an objectively meaningful material with high recycled content, which everybody can use to continue making all the beautiful and functional products that they are making? So that was the whole idea. And if we are making tableware, then probably we can definitely make decorative products out of it as well. So that was the whole thought process. And we have got, so of course, for right now, we are using just fresh glaze to coat the recycled ceramic body. And that ways we can easily have a certification for food safety. And that's when we started our enterprise by the name Tatva, so that we are able to reuse all the industrial rejects that we have. Because if we consider just a single ceramic manufacturing cluster in India, on an average, they produce about 75 tons of waste on a daily basis. And there's so much of production happening every year. So there's no dearth of raw material for us. But of course, it's a challenge to implement it at scale. I mean, industrial scale. At a studio level, we are able to implement it. And so recently, last year, we have also been granted patent for this in India. So that's the whole process where we are able to contribute to a SDG 12, which is sustainable, responsible consumption and production. And it keeps flowing because we are using clay itself as a natural binder. Once these products also break, we can keep reusing them multiple times. And the physical properties don't change. It keeps performing better. So we got this material tested at a lab as well. And it happens to be 35% stronger than conventional ceramics in terms of its compressive strength. And as mentioned earlier, because we're trying to make a universal material, we can mold that material into any of these existing products. And that ways, once this material gets adapted in different industries, we'll be able to use 60% less raw materials and vacate the landfills from the industrial regions. And so we basically cater to the end consumers as well as institutions. And we also look forward to license our composition to existing manufacturers so that in collaboration with these industries, we can have a bigger impact. So most of these industries in India have a production scale of around 10 tons per day. So if they are able to use this composition for their production, we can save 6 tons of material from being used every day from a single unit, depending on how many industries are able to use this material. And so yes, just to reiterate what the points are for this material, it's 35% stronger, it's 60% less mining for natural resources, and consumes lower energy. So again, in terms of lower energy, what we mean is in Indian industry, most of the ceramics are fired anywhere from 1200 degrees to 1260, and this is for stoneware. Porcelain will definitely be at a higher temperature. So this material gets vitrified anywhere from 1180 to 1200 degrees. And even with that, we are able to get higher impact strength. So that ways, and we are getting 50% quicker casting rate. So that helps us to 2x the productivity of the manufacturing by using lesser material. And so very interestingly, when we have to recycle any kind of other materials, we have to segregate them based on color, or we have to scrape off the color which is on the metal surface probably. And with plastics, we have to separate them based on colors, otherwise everything will become black. Interestingly, when we recycle ceramics, the glazed ceramics, we don't have to segregate them based on waste. We still get a very neutral color after we fire them. So that's a very beneficial point for industries to recycle their own ceramic waste. And these are some of the big organizations that have approached us to have some kind of collaboration with us to either use their own waste for our manufacturing, or maybe collaborate for some kind of collection. And then, so the story has also been covered by some of the most respected publications in the country. That's all from us for now. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Shashank. It's been like truly enlightening. And I really liked how you started like from describing the problem as it is and then solving it from the designer and industry perspective. I think it's been super inspiring to follow. All I can say is that I hope there are companies like yours in Ukraine to whom I can give all my unwanted shards and then buy slip from you. That would be so much easier. So hoping you grow and go globally. Do we have questions for the speaker? In the meantime, I probably have just one short question to you, Shashank, and it's about like the energy efficiency of the process. You've said that like you are able to fire your ceramics at lower temperatures, but what about the crushing process itself? Is it very energy intense?
Yes, it is energy intensive, but we just recently had our life cycle analysis done, and the overall process of our material happens to be 6% lower emissions than our conventional stoneware manufacturing. And also, so about the crushing, as the overall renewable energy industry grows and matures, we will perhaps be able to use renewable energy to crush the waste as well.
Mm,
So in the coming years, we will be able to use lesser energy in the crushing process as well.
mhm. Okay, because what I'm imagining is that for this big volumes, you probably have like this, it's not a pestle and mortar, right? It's like a machine that,
Yes. So we don't have the machine ourselves as well. We get it outsourced from the industry because
I see.
they themselves are using it. So we take a small part from them.
Okay, okay. One more question from Fran. Do you have protection for the dust generated?
So since we do not crush it ourselves, we do not need that. But of course, when we are using it, we can wear mask and then work with all the raw materials that we are working with.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, all I can say is that, again, I'd love to buy the Earth Tatva mix for my studio as well one day. Okay, then we probably have to wrap up, and I'll just continue with a few finishing words. So as we have heard and seen today, probably almost anything from a ceramic studio can be repurposed or recycled in one way or another, with some amount of labor and experiments, of course. But there are these amazing examples of the Lotte Dawes studio and the Earth Tatva ceramics, who are pioneering these ways to deal with ceramic remains. And of course, I hope there will be more companies like that who would either do it themselves or offer their products for other ceramicists as well, so that we can have a better choice of materials and not just keep depleting those raw materials from the, from the earth, but buying something that's been recycled and offered. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. There will be more webinars like this on different topics in sustainability in ceramics production. We already had one about firing just last month, and there was also one about potters and war. And this is not the environmental topic per se, but it also has to do with sustainability in a broader context, like about social justice and things like that. This project called Saving the World as a Potter is something that I've been able to do since this year, thanks to people who support my work on Patreon, Here and Now Pottery, Patreon, and also recently is the Risk Taker Fellowship. So there will be like a series of webinars and articles, and then hopefully there will be a book based on these conversations with pioneering potters somewhere at the end of this year, hopefully. So if you have other potters and ceramicists who you think would be great speakers for this series, please write to me and I'll try to get in contact with them. Otherwise, follow Here and Now Pottery for announcements. And with this, I would probably thank our speakers so much, Lotte and Shashank, for your time and for the inspirations that you have shared. Thank you, dear guests and audience for being active and supporting. And I wish us all success in and inspiration in what we are doing as artists, and to us as humanity also success and inspiration in trying to live more sustainably and operate more sustainably and save our precious planet and its people and other inhabitants.